being a little bit older of a gamer, I can actually say that I've lived through the Great War. The war that would start all wars. The Great Game Console War between Nintendo and Sega. Hey, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate each and every one of you. This week I wanted to fire up the Dreamcast. I haven't fired that up in a long time. I keep all my consoles in plastic bins with lids. They're airtight. I keep them in my video game room, so, try to keep them in the best shape that I can, not, expose the light, low light in there. I don't want any fading on some of the consoles, and so last night, I decided around 12:30 at night I was going to fire up the Dreamcast and get it ready for some filming today. And when I went to fire it up, the on button stuck. I was like, are you kidding me? And I couldn't get it to on stick just by pushing it. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to open it up. So I hit the open button to open the door up. That stuck as well. I couldn't believe it. So this morning I got up early and I decided to take it apart and clean those two parts out. And it's not that difficult to open up. It's 4 screws on the back. You got to take off the network adapter to actually get to one of the screws. But when you open it up, you can just get right at everything. And I'm just cleaning it with some isopropyl alcohol here, wiping it down, getting the buttons all working good. There was a lot of hand cheese in it. I guess last time I got this thing out, I really didn't look at it that closely, and I put it away. So this time that I got all the isopropyl alcohol out, I thought I'd just give the case a really good wipe down on the outside of it, clean it up, take a magic eraser to it, and get some of the some of the dust that's just built up and got hard over time, and putting it back together and getting ready to play this thing, and it looks pretty dang good. Back in the latter 80s and 90s, there was a huge video game console war between Nintendo and Sega. It was with their next generation consoles, the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. And I can remember being on the Sega Genesis camp. I owned a Sega Genesis. It was the more adult of the two. Back then, I was, just about 19, 20 years old when that machine came out. And that was the console that I chose between the two. I wanted the more adult console that was going to play some of the serious games for serious gamers. And what I didn't know back then is that games make the console. When the games are there, it is fun. That's all that matters. I should have bought both the consoles back then and collected for both of them. And today, I still have some of my original Sega Genesis games back there. And if I would have bought a Super Nintendo, I probably would still have some of those regular Nintendo games as well. And I'm not going to go in details about that console war. There is a book out there that I really love. It's Console Wars, and it was by Blake J. Harris. And there's an audiobook to this. I suggest you guys pick up that audiobook. That is an awesome book to listen to. It's one of those audiobooks that you're just going to stop when you get a parking lot and continue to listen to end one chapter before you get out of the vehicle. Towards the end of the console war, it was pretty tough being a Sega owner because they were in desperation to try to get back on top no matter what they did, So, they added the Sega CD, and that was another add-on that you had to buy. They added the Sega 32X, which was another add-on you had to buy. And, when you're investing all this money in these add-ons and all of a sudden they announce that the Sega Saturn's coming out, you get to be a little pissed off as a gamer. A lot of the retailers are pretty pissed off too because here they've been buying all this stock of, Sega CDs, Sega, 32Xs, the games for both of them, and now they've announced a Sega Saturn, and it was going to be released the day that they announced it. It was going to be released in stores, but only so many stores had gotten inventories of this. So it was a scarce item to find because retailers were so pissed off they didn't want to carry that stuff. It wasn't going to sell. So a lot of us gamers weren't spending our money on new Sega products. We just didn't have the faith in it. So when these Saturn games came out, we didn't see them in the retailers. We didn't see them on the store shelves, so we didn't spend our money. we just felt like we were ripped off from Sega. A lot of us picked up Sony PlayStation 1s, and we were playing our PlayStations. We were loving the PlayStation, and a lot of our money went into that. We weren't going to give our money back to Sega after the disaster that we had at the end of the console wars. I don't know if it was PTSD or if we were just that mad. We weren't going to do it. So when the Sega Dreamcast came out, we really were leery of looking at this thing and playing it. And if it wasn't for Sega Sports, I probably would have never even gave it a thought. So when the Dreamcast came out, it was the first one of the next generation consoles to be out. They had a jump on everybody, but people were so fed up with Sega that they just didn't really want to reinvest their money. This system is actually a really good system. And when you look at comparing it to other systems of the days and coming out a couple years before everybody else, they just didn't get a fair shot. These consoles are about 25 years old if you got one in North America, 26 if you got one in Japan, and most of these batteries are all dead in them. So you can see right now my battery's dead, and I got to set my time every time I play it. And a lot of times you can have leaking capacitors inside, the consoles themselves, or if you got the skills, you can desolder all this stuff and replace batteries and get them up and running, and they'll look great. Some of these games look really good, and they play well, as well. But the PS2 came out the following year, and that was a juggernaut with that playing DVDs as well as games. And the following year after that is when the GameCube and the Xbox was released. And the games were coming out for this thing, but they weren't hitting the shelves. We weren't seeing them locally. We weren't seeing them in our retailers, and it was a shame because we had tons of options, not like today. Today, you can have new release games come out, and you won't see them in the store until a week after they've already been released. The Dreamcast was the little engine that could, but never would. And that's just a shame because Sega was one of the greatest developers we had. Not only did they make consoles, but they made and developed games that we wanted to play, that we did play. And it's a shame because in the year 2000, Sega made a decision to get out of the console market and just solely go for developing. And they have developed some great games since then. And it's really hard to find Dreamcast games in retro video game stores here in southern Minnesota. And it's a crying shame because some of these games are good games. And there are some great games on the Dreamcast. Now let's talk about the controller a little bit. The controller was a fun controller. I really liked the controller. I can see where it came from the Knights 3D controller for the Saturn and how they kind of ported that over to this one, but they kind of tweaked it, and it was a pretty good controller. Now, I'm not playing with that controller right now. I am playing with the Retro Fighter Striker DC wireless gamepad, and boy, it is fun playing on the Dreamcast with that controller. When I picked the thing up, I thought it was really light. It felt cheap. But when I started playing with it, it was a solid, good controller. I liked how the buttons felt. I liked how the D-pad moved, and just didn't have any problems playing with it whatsoever. Now, the Dreamcast is an affordable console to collect for. It's not that expensive. You can get a used one for $80 to $100, but the problem is what shape is it going to be in? Are you going to have to repair it? Do you have soldering skills? Those are the questions you're going to have to ask yourself. As for the games, they're hard to find out there right now. You could probably eBay them or Macari them, but it's fun to find these games, and you can get games for anywhere from $2 to $220. The past 24 years after leaving the hardware industry and just focusing on software, they've made a lot of games during that time for a lot of different companies. And showing up this last year on Nintendo's Switch and having Genesis games available there to play. And Sega last year teased us with new releases of Jet Set Radio Future, Shinobi, Golden Axe, Streets of Rage, and Crazy Taxi. And we have yet to see them come out, but when they do, I will be buying them. I am excited for all those titles on whatever platform they show up on. Hope you enjoyed taking a look back at the Sega Dreamcast. I had fun playing it. It was good to get it out of the box and knock the dust off of it, literally. Hope you guys are all having a great October. We will see you on the next video. Until then, game on.